They have nearly a century of history, but they don't have a home. Watertown's community theater groups are vying for a dedicated venue. Since, as 7 News reporter Chad Charette tells us, their go-to now is something they simply can't afford.
They're calling it guerrilla theater.
I had to, I couldn't see.
Local acting troupe Little Theater of Watertown has held performances in Clayton, online, and most recently at the Jefferson County Fairgrounds.
Vegetable line invading parity can help improve eyesight.
A varied resume, but organization head Amanda Morrison tells us that nomadic approach comes with some cons.
It becomes difficult for people to know where you are because you don't have a consistent spot. It becomes difficult to plan and schedule shows because you don't know where you're going to be.
Normally, the city's performing arts group's go-to location would be the Dulles State Office Building's auditorium.
People wouldn't have to bring their own sound or light. The seats were renovated so they're comfortable. The view from every seat is fantastic. The stage is well made.
But due to an April 2022 mandate from the state, the venue has become prohibitively expensive, sometimes tripling in price. That's because it's now charging for rehearsals, setup, and teardown instead of just events on their own.
At the rate we're going with the cost of venue usages, we're going to have to start pricing ourselves out of the accessible line, and that's against what I believe all of us are here for.
Morrison tells us local theater groups have reached out to the state to see if they'd be able to make the venue more affordable. As of now, however, nothing has come of that. These organizations do, however, have high hopes for the former Club Rio, a space Jefferson Community College and neighbors of Watertown are redoing, part of the state's downtown revitalization project.
That's really perfect for the size of shows and stuff that I need to do because straight plays just average a smaller audience.
Making the most of what they have, but hoping for a more stable future. Chad Charette, 7 News.